Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Path Break, the podcast series by Path Builder. Path Builder is an organization that looks to empower young people to take action towards a purpose. And today's podcast, we'll soon introduce our speaker. The idea is to give you an idea in terms of fellowship programs. There are a lot of fellowship programs out there. The speaker has done a couple of them. We want him to share his experience. So without any further ado, let me bring Ayush online. Ayush, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Alex. Really excited about this. My name is Ayush. I work in the social impact sector. Full-time, I work in an organization called Quest Alliance. Majorly, my work is around making sure that these students that we skill build from ITI and VTI institutes are getting post-college and post-college support. So I work majorly with the alumni and also specifically with the women learners for them to have a sort of a sustainable, supportive ecosystem from their family. So making sure that they are getting the right kind of frameworks and the right kind of understanding of how to sort of convey their aspirations to their family so that they're able to navigate through their career in a much better way. So these are the two pieces that I sort of look at in my organizations, and outside of my organizations, I sort of work around taking these workshops with some of the non-for-profits and social enterprises and enabling organizations or even on an individual basis, these workshops to make sure that organizations and individuals are able to sort of navigate through a more purpose-driven journey and sort of identify the gaps and challenges and then sort of design a curriculum and a workshop and then take them through it. So that's roughly what I do.
No, and fascinating work. And I met Ayush while he was a fellow with Amani, and we'll get into that. And he got an opportunity to work at Upaya. So moving straight to the topic, Ayush, you've done a couple of fellowships. Tell us about these fellowship programs that you've done.
Sure. So I think fortunately or unfortunately, I never did any of these fellowships right after my college, though I do feel that it's very important if somebody is sort of wanting to explore the social sector. It's a good opportunity for them to sort of do these fellowships and get a larger understanding of the sector. But I basically came from advertising of like 6-7 years of experience in advertising. And then I wanted to do something much more sort of people-centric, something much more purpose-driven. So actually fellowship, I never consciously sort of applied for it. It happened to me. It was something around, I was applying for MBA colleges. I was looking at leadership courses. And then I came across a fellowship, which was a very non-college format in which there's no sort of a semester criteria and a very agile sort of a structure and a very collaborative community learning sort of a structure where there's a lot of peer group learning, which fascinated me a lot because that was a very different format altogether. And it was a tough decision for me because I had sort of left my advertising career, and then I was planning to go for further studies and apply for different MBA colleges. But then this sort of a leadership program I felt would be much more useful for me. So the first fellowship was actually an India Fellow Leadership Program. Okay. And the structure of it was more or less like you get training from the fellowship, and then they sort of place you in one of the NGOs across India with whom they have partnership. And from there on, you sort of get placed in that organization, learn about that organizations, learn about that specific sector, you understand how does the organization really functions, what are stakeholders, what are the pain points, what are the challenges, and you really get deep into the organization which you are working in. The good aspect of it is that there are different sort of meetup points. So, for example, I was placed in a health organization that used to work on maternal and neonatal health. But when I used to sort of come back for the trainings, the other 33, 32 fellows used to come back with their stories of them working in organizations which were into livelihood, education, women empowerment, agriculture. So in that 1 year, you get to live a lot of stories and you get to understand those realities. So it's a huge perspective change. And at a very, in a very limited time, you also get an understanding of the challenges of the sector. So that I think was really, really helpful. And as a part of this fellowship, also sideways, there was an UNESCO communication program, which was more around communication and media related training of how really media plays an important role when you're trying to sort of do social change, because at this point of time, information is power. So just understanding those dynamics of how information travels and how can we make sure that the authenticity of the information kind of is intact. So that was another sort of a vertical which I was able to explore. The communication side of the social sector, which is the communication for social change. And then, of course, the Amani Fellowship happened, and this program was around social innovation management, which is basically for any individual to understand what is it that they are really kind of wanting to strive for, and then sort of creating an intervention. And the fellowship also helps you take one step at a time to sort of design what you are looking forward to. From identifying what is it that you want to work in, to sort of hand-holding you into areas where you can sort of seek support, how you're supposed to sense the challenges that might come in your journey, so on and so forth, and then designing and prototyping your intervention, and then sort of kicking it off and collaborating with people. So in a way, all these three fellowships gave me a very, very different perspective, because the first fellowship sort of told me about the sector at a macro lens. The second fellowship sort of told me about the importance of how the information sort of travels and how one should sort of treat just the power of communication in the sector, even if you are communicating with your stakeholders or with the government or with your peer organizations. So that's a very strong sort of a vertical. And the third fellowship helped me to understand how to sort of kick off something that you're passionate about, or something that you would want to that's not even important if you want to just build an organization out of it, even if you want to just take it up as a project or just as an initiative, or even as a side gig which you want to pursue because it really fulfills you. It was able to sort of guide how to sort of go in that direction. So overall, this is what the fellowship I was giving.
Got it. So one question is, both Amani and the India Fellow, how long were these programs?
So they are very dynamic in nature. So India Fellowship program is about this 13 months program, where it's actually 9 months, but then you also have other trainings at the same time. And also depends on the organization that you're working for. So for example, my organization, I was a part of a project which also I had to be involved in a little bit even after my fellowship, even though I was not working in the organization, but I was remotely sort of working with them. So it depends upon the formal structure of the organization is about like 9 months. And for Amani Fellowship, it's more or less like 6 to 7 months, where you sort of have these trainings, and then again the organization that you're working for Sometimes the fellows resonate with the organization and then they continue informally with the organization, not as a part of fellowship. And sometimes also what happens is during the end of the fellowship, you are given a sort of a training which you have to finish by the next 4 months. So more or less you are, in any fellowship, I would say, it is a commitment of a year if you really want to get deep dive into understanding the sector properly. Yeah. So it really varies in that sense, but to generalize it, I would say one needs to sort of have a headspace and a bandwidth of a year for them to really get something fruitful out of it.
Got it. So one question that keeps coming up with a lot of people is, some fellowships have a stipend, some don't, some you have to pay a fee. When you went through this, how did you manage surviving end of the day?
Sure. And that becomes a big challenge also, I can understand. Yeah. So because I was already coming from a place where I was working for 5-6 years, I had my savings, and this is something I looked at it as an investment because I wanted to sort of understand and change my field from a high advertising, marketing professional to into the social sector. So I realized that this would require me a certain amount of time, and I looked at it as an investment. And fortunately, both the fellowships sort of gave me a small grant to so that I am not spending out of my own pocket, but I'm getting a stipend which enables me to take care of my daily expenditure, so on and so forth. Yeah. So I think that sort of becomes a little bit of a relief because you also understand that it's not easy to sort of survive in an ecosystem where you're also investing on your learning, and at the same time you're also trying to figure out your career trajectory, and you also sort of are not having a very clear pathway. Yeah. But yes, the stipend does help. Some fellowships do offer it, some don't. Depends on sometimes the organization as well. Sometimes the fellows also apply to different foundations, stating their purpose and stating their journey and asking for some grants. So that's also another route that one can take.
Got it. Yeah, no, I think that's really useful information. Just moving to just practically, like when you go through a fellowship program, for the listeners, can you paint a picture of what a typical day looks like? What are activities? What are they expected to do?
Sure. So I think initially it is a lot about understanding the organization and how it functions. Mm-hmm. A lot of times fellows, when they go into this organization, the social sector works very differently. Yeah. A lot of times fellows, they come from a very corporate background, or they come from colleges which have taught them business in a very, very different way. Yeah. Fortunately, most of the organizations that I have worked with are very, very people-centric. Uh-huh. So it takes a while to really rewire an individual of how the sector functions. Yeah. A lot of times the decision-making might get delayed because there are complexities involved. There are many sort of stakeholders involved. So learning how to, be a part of, learning how to be a part of that process, and also having that sort of patience, and also having the ability to look at the entire situation in a very, very holistic way requires a lot of patience and empathy. Yeah. So to understand really that process, I feel it requires at least a month or two for the fellow to really understand what the organization is doing, and also go through the reports and research that the organization has to offer of the work that they have been doing for the longest time. Yeah. So even in my first fellowship, it legit took me more than a month to really get equipped with what the organization was doing. Mm-hmm. and what were the interventions they have done in the past.
Yeah.
So of course, the orientation did take place for a week or so,
Uh-huh.
but there was a lot of reading, there was a lot of visiting the stakeholders, the field location, talking to the field staff, and listening to a lot of stories, because by the end of the day, it's more around setting the context in mind so that one can really have a good decision making.
Got it.
So initially, it's more about the orientation, about understanding the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And for a fellow, I feel what happens is initially most of the organization will set them up with some basic deliverables.
Yeah.
So that basic deliverables could be mostly around collating information. Maybe there's a project that is just sort of wrapping up. So creating a report around it. Also, for me, it was more around exploring the role.
Yeah.
I went as a communications fellow for the organization, but I also slowly and eventually, when I understood what the work the organization was doing, I got involved into some of the program level roles, some roles which required me to talk to the stakeholders and create sort of those narratives, some work around creating an event of the work that the organization did for the last 15 years. So this was never mentioned in my role or my job description as a fellow. But it's also, I feel, in the process of the fellowship, the fellows also understand what are their strength areas and what they can offer. And in that process, what is the learning that they can get?
Yeah.
Because by the end of the day, it's more about you get as much as you give in. That's one of the golden line I always sort of remember during my fellowship journeys, which is the more that I give in is the more I'll get out of it. Otherwise, a lot of times you can just sleepwalk through your journey in the organization and sort of just deliver what is expected out of you, but that might not be very fruitful. So it's a lot around exploring the roles and trying different hands on different departments, and also showcasing your skill sets of why is it that you are interested in a certain project, which might not be a part of your work in the first place.
Got it. Tell us one or two things that were unexpected or like a wow moment for you during your fellowship program. I think you touched upon it in terms of just the way the not-for-profit world works. But was there anything personally for you that was hey, I wasn't expecting this, or wow, this is a Eureka moment?
Sure, I think a couple of things actually. I think living a city boy life, you suddenly get exposed to some of the really big realities of the country. And then you sort of start questioning a lot of different things. Like we go to a movie theater or we buy a salad and it costs us 500 or 400 rupees. But what that amount does in an extremely rural area, or what that means, the definition and the reality completely changes. And it was a big sort of a shock to me. I always knew that there are struggles in the urban areas, but then when you actually go there, live with the community, and that's when you really understand the world that we are living in is so divided in that sense. So I won't say a wow or a Eureka moment, but I think I genuinely feel every individual or even schools and colleges should really promote rural visits so that it helps us develop that sort of reality of the place that we are living right now. And it's also super important to, it just helps generate that sense of purpose of why are we doing what we are doing. Other than that, I think there are a lot of, reality checks that one gets when they start working in the sector. Because they are facing most of these challenges and issues firsthand. But away from all of those things, I would say a Eureka moment would definitely be how the organizations in the social sector, at least majority of them, function, which is there is always a high trust element, and people are given a sort of ownership to sort of function the way they want. Most of the organization, as I earlier mentioned, is a people first organization. So the culture is sort of, in that way. And for me, it was a high impact because I was coming from a very cutthroat industry of marketing and advertising.
Yeah.
So when somebody used to sort of tell, like, if because we couldn't find a stakeholder or we couldn't find somebody that we had to interview, and I was scared to death that, what is my manager going to say if I come back and tell that we weren't able to find.
Yeah.
And the most of the times the response was that it's okay, like, maybe the next time we'll try. So there's a lot of understanding of human element, I guess. So
Yes.
it also frees you from a certain level of toxic pressure, which I think now the corporate is also understanding. But yes, definitely it came from some of the leading social sector organizations, and now it's kind of getting into the corporate as well, which I'm quite happy about.
Got it. And that's a good segue in terms of like thinking about like these fellowship programs tend to be a year long. It gives people time to reflect. But then from there, when people need to go out and look for jobs, right? Because you do need to build a professional career. What's your advice to them, or how can one go about that?
Sure. So I think it's the sector in general. It's very vast because there's a place for an architect, there's a place for a designer, there's a place for a creator, a person who is a master's in mathematics. Everybody has got a place in the sector.
Yeah.
It's super important to understand in the long run that one can sustain themselves in a sector when that sense of purpose is coming from a very honest place.
Yeah.
So I might be very, empathetic about newborn babies and wanting to work for neonatal health.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can say passion lies in making sure that a good education is delivered to kids, then it's important for an individual to come to an understanding what is it that is really driving them.
Got it.
Because if a lot of times what might happen is you might feel that there are areas which are about life and death and you should sort of go in that direction. But in the longer run, what will matter is what you are able to resonate with more.
Yeah.
What I'm certainly trying to say over here is it's important even after the fellowship to have a clear understanding of two major areas, which is the sector that you want to get into. Are you passionate about livelihood, about education, about agriculture, about sanitization, so on and so forth? And even in an organization, which is the department that you want to sort of pursue.
Mm-hmm.
So these two clarities are super important. And I do understand that as a person who's just starting might not get exactly what they're looking for. And that's the reason after my fellowship journey, I sort of shortlisted 3 sort of options for myself.
Yeah.
That these are the 3 things which I would like to start with. And if any of the options I get, I would sort of go for it. I knew that I was passionate about education and I knew I wanted to get into some sort of a skill building.
Yeah.
So, and for me, the other options were also working with on livelihood and on social entrepreneurship. But luckily, I did get an opportunity which I was sort of really interested in. So it sort of worked out in that sense. So it's important to have limited options and having an awareness of what is it that after understanding about the sector, what is it that resonates with an individual the most. Because a lot of times I've seen people just going into any of the organization just because it's an NGO, it in the longer run won't help.
Yeah.
Because your constant yearning will be for a different cause. So it's very important to take your time and stick to the cause that you really believe in.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you in terms of just, fellowship programs. I think, as you said, is a really good time for you to really reflect, self-reflect, identify what are areas, passion areas, look at what are skill set that you have that you can leverage, and then connecting it to sort of the sector that you want to work with. And I think that's the approach that one should take. We're almost time, Ayush. Before I thank you, any last bit of advice, hacks for listeners, especially young people who are interested in doing a fellowship program?
Sure. I think I would sort of just say, with respect to certain skill sets, which are sort of very, very important when a person is going for fellowships, and also, especially if an organization is paying a fellow, then they would also expect some sort of key skill sets. So when I talk about some of these soft skills, I would say it's important to be very, very open to learning. One should have agility, that of change of plans can take place at any given point of time. High self-awareness is definitely needed. And just operating out of curiosity than judgment will go a long way for anybody who's sort of exploring the fellowship domain. And last but not the least, I think empathy is super important, because by the end of the day, that's a key driving factor for a fellow. And with respect to, I think, technical skills, I do feel the organizations would never give you a very, very high technical task, which they'll always give you a generic, task, because you're also in the process of learning and knowing the organization. So I think some digital skills might get super handy. You can sort of make sure that you're creating a good outreach of the work that the organization is doing. Some social media skills, some, you can say, documentation skills, operating, camera, maybe editing skills, some writing skills, or good communication skills when you are talking to even the stakeholders or somebody you might represent your organization at a platform. So I think these are some of the technical skills which might come in really handy. So for somebody who is thinking of applying maybe after a year for a fellowship, can start sort of learning these skills by today itself. So by the time they are placed in an organization, they are well equipped with supporting the organization in the best way possible.
Got it. Yeah, no, so great. I think everything that you said makes complete sense, especially for someone who's like me, who's been in the sector, looked at sort of the young talent that comes into the sector. I think fellowship's a great opportunity for people to explore, especially early on in their career, really get the kind of exposure and experience without really getting into a full-time job and trying to, more than anything, figure things out. So again, thanks a lot, Ayush, for your time. And thank you to the listeners for listening to this Pathbreaker podcast. Hope it was insightful. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our weekly job compilation that gives information on job opportunities in the social media. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, Alex. Lovely to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you.